isn't founded on certainties. Hi, I'm Ben. Welcome to my book corner, and we're at the penultimate review of the Festival of Fear for October 2023. If you've been here before, then you'll know how this goes, but if not, first of all, welcome. We'll start by looking at the story before moving on to the characters, the setting and the world building, the book's overall presentation, and then my final thoughts at the end. If you enjoy this video, I'd really appreciate it if you drop a like down below, and just say hi in the comments, let's have a chat. With all that being said, let's begin. If you are familiar with folktales in general, and Fae folktales in particular, the settings for this will not seem too dissimilar to some stuff that you will have seen elsewhere. You are following Mina in this tale as she's travelling across country to make a delivery, and she decides to take a road that takes her through a forest that is not on any map, bizarrely, which does not cause any alarm bells apparently. As she enters the forest, her car breaks down, her phone stops working, and being aware that there's nothing behind her for miles and miles, she decides instead to go forward into the spooky forest, which goes as well as you would expect. She hears a blood-curdling scream, she bolts, and she ends up running into some other people who are also trapped in the forest. In the case of some of them, they've been trapped there for years. And you then end up with a new form of status quo as you have this small group of 4 people trying to survive the night every night, as whatever this threat is only comes out at night, and they've got to be back at this sort of shack. By the time the light turns on, the only thing in the area that seems to work that's electronic. You have an interesting interplay between the groups, as some of them still want to escape and get home, whereas others have been there that long, it's like escape's not possible. Escape is possible, and they do, with about a third of the book to go. And it does make you wonder, it's an odd time for them to escape until you realise there's more permutations of what's gone on here that are not explored, although they are really well foreshadowed earlier in the title. I personally love folklore, and I love Fae stories in particular, especially when they follow a much darker path. So for me personally, I really enjoy the story of this one. I think it's really strong. On top of that, this is exploring certain Fae creatures that you don't really see that much in many regards in literature, although they seem to be around a little bit more at the moment. But the creatures in this are a very unique kind of threat, and I really appreciate that as well. So there are a number of characters in this title. The main character is Mina, who is the young lady travelling from one town to the next to deliver a parrot. However, there are others as well, but we're going to start with Mina. Mina is a bit listless in life in many regards. She's an artist who takes random commissions, drawing and stuff, and she's very much someone who will go out, sit in a cafe, people watch, and she'll be looking at faces and observing how people look and trying to read their feelings from the way that they look, and she'll sketch them, the interesting people in the world, and sort of create a narrative for them. And that actually does play into the story because of some people that she observes within this, and also some of the sort of introspections and some of the observations that she makes of the other survivors that she ends up sort of living with for a period of time. Now, on saying that, she's not an especially likeable character in many regards, but she is really well written. She's very much a loner, so she's somebody who will not be missed if she goes missing. So overall, whilst you don't really root for her like you do for some of the others, she is a well-rounded character. Now, the other 3 main characters that I'm going to mention, first one is Madeline, and she has been the longest person stuck in this place. She's a woman who's probably in her 60s at this point, tall, really slim, emaciated in many regards, keeps her body covered in like a shawl to keep the cold off, and she's very much a strict stepmother archetype in many regards, berating people, but it's because she's survived for so long, or at least that's as it appears. And once they get out, she has the impression that she doesn't know how to cope in this outside world because it's been so long. You also have Daniel, who's a teenager who's running away from home after having issues with the father. again somebody who will not be missed, who is described in many regards as not being the brightest of souls, although this is largely because he's been from a very strict family. He's got no level of self-esteem, so he's just taken his bike and ridden away to start a new life away from everything else. Someone who you kind of do root for. He has a heart of gold in many regards, and he's developed a really close relationship with Sierra. I'm going to get this name wrong. I can't say words and names. And she is the unique one in this group, as she came here with her husband, John, or Jack. Now I'm wondering, is it John or is it Jack? It's John. Who you see in the prologue falling victim to these creatures, although you don't know what it is. And again, she's very much the soft, caring, bubbly person who this sort of gets stripped away. In many regards, she has the most complete character arc of all the characters in this. And again, unlike Madeline and Mina, who you don't really root for, you really do root for Kiara and Daniel in particular. And I think as a dynamic between the group, it's really, really interesting with having the overly strict stepmother, who Mina sort of doesn't like, but learns to respect and see something in her. But there's also something slightly off. She can see, because of her observations, that there's loads of secrets wrapped up in there. And the interaction is really strong, and it only gets heightened once they get out of the place as certain things are revealed. So overall, this is stellar character work. This is set in Galway in Ireland, which is, from my understanding, quite a rural area in Ireland. And I believe it takes place in the autumn or the fall, as Americans like to call it. And being from the UK, and we're in that period of the year right now, I could say that it can be quite grim, and a lot of the descriptions of like what I would call moorlands, I don't know if that's the right term for them, is very muted, very grey, almost bleached in many regards. And the forest in particular has this sort of level of being muted in many regards. There's no sounds, there's no animals, even the birds avoid it. Add a sense of creep and tension to the setting in general. Then you have the sort of the shelter where they are all staying and surviving, and there's just little bits of environmental storytelling going on in here. Scratches on the wall, little comments written in certain places, the interesting sort of windowed mirror that is on the inside so that you can't really see what's out there. All really interesting and well done, and even then the secrets kept within these places, almost within plain sight in many regards. And all that serves to heighten a level of tension and immersion in the story, which is exceptionally well done. Now, on the Fae side of things, whilst the threat is Fae in nature, it's never explicitly explained, although you do discover what the threat actually is, but you don't get a sense of any purpose behind it in many regards, other than a purely animalistic take for the majority of the title. But there are twists and turns in there involving these creatures, and they are foreshadowed really, really well quite early on in the book, which I really appreciated. So overall, I think the world building really does elevate, or the setting I should say, elevates the sense of tension and dread and suspense that you feel in here, whilst also keeping the threat very, very mysterious by design in many regards as well. Presentation then. First things first, there's some good foreshadowing of some of the twists in here on the front cover of the title. And on a side note, my friend Noah at In Between the Lines has already reviewed another title by the author, which is called, my brain has gone to sleep, The Creeper. But I mentioned that because of the cover of The Creeper as well. It's very similar to this. It's almost like an inverted colour swap, whereas this is the white background and the black silhouettes. That's white silhouettes on a black background. And I'm really curious to see if or how much these two titles are related, so I will be checking that out at a later date. In terms of pacing and plotting, this is split up into three reasonably clear areas, although they're not even in size. You have the initial setup where you're getting to know Mina and what the status quo is like, which is important because then that gets taken away in the second point, as we kind of hit what I would call a base under siege section, where you've got a small group of survivors against a foe they have no chance of beating and just trying to survive. and the actual day-to-day sort of threat there is really, really well plotted and well paced. The ticking clock of having to be back in the shelter by the time that the light goes off really helps ramp the tension up, and the fact that some of the people in there almost have an instinctive grasp of what time it is constantly helps to reinforce this, as well as foreshadowing other stuff later on in the title. Then you have the last section, the escape, for want of a better term, and this is where the contrast comes in again between the life they've been living out in this forest where they have no amenities and they're really struggling, to the loud cacophony and sounds of the city as they return there, the bright lights and how loud everything is. And also the sense of, at least initially, safety. They're back home, they're away from these creatures that don't leave the forest, or so it would appear. But that's really well done as well. The other thing I want to mention is the actual writing style itself. I initially had some issues in the first 15-20%, as for me the script seemed a bit too whimsical in many regards. A bit too cotton candy, a lot of metaphors and similes, and everything was like something else. And I don't know if it's just that I got used to the writing style the more I read the book, but I have a feeling it wasn't that at all. I have checked back through little bits, and it feels like the writing style gradually shifted from one which was almost poetic at the beginning to far more blunt prose by the end of the book, and I think that is a deliberate writing choice in many regards, if that is what it is and it's not just me misreading that, because it sort of coincided with how Mina character arc sort of runs, as she has very much the shelterings and the cotton candy around her life and very much the sort of superfluousness that we surround ourselves with stripped away till she's at a point of survival. That's all that matters, which is a far more simple, straightforward and blunt way of living compared to the distractions that we constantly surround ourselves with. Again, that could just be me totally misreading that, but that's how it felt when reading it, and if that is what it was, then it's a really, really clever choice to make. So overall, the presentation of this one is also really good. But that fetches me to my final thoughts. So, I've said this before, but for me, folk horror is in many regards the best horror. I love when things dive into this sort of stuff, so it's no surprise to me that overall I really liked this title. Again, as already mentioned, I had a few issues early on with the writing style, but I overcame them or the writing style changed, one or the other. I think the threat is really interesting and really obfuscated in a clever way, but there's also some really, really smart foreshadowing and hints all the way through this book at the true nature of the threat and what's really going on. And I also like the fact that you don't get any real concrete answers at the end of the book, as there's things that happen towards the end which kind of change the status quo a little bit and the understanding of the story as a whole. So for me personally, this goes in a high B tier. I highly recommend this, especially if you like your folk tales, your folk horror. But what I want to know is, have you read this? What did you think? Have you read any other titles by the same author? Let me know in the comments below. I'll catch you next time.